And I want you to welcome one of my favorite preachers, too, Keri Ladouceur.
Thank you, Stan. My friends who know me will tell you, you don't want to ride around in the back seat of the car while I'm driving. I drive this big, jacked up, like 4-wheel drive Jeep Wrangler, and it's a stick shift. And so it's a little bumpy in the back seat. You really don't want to do that. I took one of my seminary professors, a Bible scholar, to lunch with a group of students one time, and we got back to the class, and he said, I'm going to need a couple minutes. I didn't think I was going to live through that. And I don't think I'm a bad driver. This was like my 20-year-old, rust bucket is what my kids called it. But it is an honor to be in the driver's seat in this incredible thing that I get to be a part of called the Post-Evangelical Collective. When Stan and Jeff invited me to preach, they said, we want to ask you to come preach at Wild Goose and do something called Wake the Goose. And I thought, what does that mean, wake the goose? I learned after day one I had to eliminate all Mary Oliver that I already had in my notebook because we have heard a beautiful great deal of Mary Oliver, one of my favorite poets. But I was delighted to think about what would it look like to wake the goose. Rather than talking about the list of things right now that keep me up at night, I thought it might be interesting to just share with you some of the things that are getting me up in the morning right now. As someone who has been on sort of my own journey, of a deconstruction or a faith shattering, or perhaps for you it was just a slow unraveling, like one thread that held your faith paradigm together got pulled and then the whole thing sort of unraveled, right? I know in my own journey it was when I encountered pain that this happened for me, and I think for each one of us our journey is so different. And I don't claim to be able to offer you, any next steps or keys to that journey. But I think there's something beautiful when we can just share what our own journey has been. And so I thought I would do just a little bit of that with you this morning, if that's okay. My own just sort of journey with Jesus and with the gospel and with the things that I'm wrestling with of spirituality and faith now. This has maybe been the last 8 or 10 years for me, my unraveling. I kind of found my way in church at a Southern Baptist church. I was a middle school youth pastor for about the first 2 months until they hired somebody that didn't like that language, and I became a youth director. I don't know if you have heard of these types of stories. And I did that for several years, and this was a really expansive vision of the gospel for me. I grew up in a pretty harmful home in a Southern Baptist tradition. I saw lots of really awful things, the consequences of addiction and trauma and adultery and abuse in my home. And so when I went to church on Sunday and I saw these people sort of dressed up and looking at it, I'm like, wait, this is not, nobody actually believes this. We're all sort of pretending. They're all hypocrites because at home they're different, because my experience at home was different. And so I maybe deconstructed or walked away from the faith, when I was 14 or 15. But as an early 20-year-old, I found my way into the Southern Baptist Church. I'm doing youth ministry. And then the man that I was married to wanted to go do an internship at Willow Creek Community Church. It's this massively influential church. Maybe at one time it was the biggest church in North America. They influenced the church around the world. My experience, so I didn't know what Willow was until we moved to Chicago and I got to experience it for the first time. My experience was actually that this was quite an expansive view of the gospel from the one that I had been handed. It was an experience where I saw women leading next to men. It was the first time I experienced a woman preaching, right? This was expansive. I was in a context where we were talking about our racial identity and what racial reconciliation looks like. We're doing our own sort of story work on our ethnicity. I get a little bit more in touch with my indigenous roots and start just getting a taste of indigenous spirituality in this time. I feel like there was a coming home to myself, or a coming home to the centering of what I found compelling about Jesus. We did racial reconciliation work. We studied in the Middle East, right? These topics of what is a multiple narrative or a dual narrative in the midst of conflict. This was an expansive version of the gospel for me from what I had been handed. And then I had an experience while I was working there that really revealed there were some gaps in what we said we believed about these things and how we acted. Particularly how we held power and how we responded to situations of abuse. And what I learned in this season, sort of my own shattering of speaking up about harm in a system that I thought that sort of information would be a gift and an invitation. I had no idea what would come behind that. And so this was sort of my own shattering, to experience harm and betrayal from these people who had been spiritual leaders in my life. And as I walked through this sort of dark night of the soul, having to reconcile, there's a gap here. And I had done this work within my indigenous theology to understand that you can tell what somebody believes by how they behave. So we can't have these values up on the walls that our behaviors do not actually embody, right? These are just aspirational slogans that we slap onto Jesus, versus the disorienting, reorienting work of embodying the values of God's kingdom. And so this gap became clear for me, and I desperately wanted to be done with the church. I desperately wanted to be done with God, because prior to this, I had been given no paradigm for suffering. I had been given no paradigm other than that sort of spiritual prosperity gospel you might have heard, like if you act right, believe right, things will go well, right? This is like the blessed life sort of paradigm. And I think sometimes we don't say that out loud. But if you were offered a shame-based, fear-oriented, behavior modification version of faith to earn something down the road, this might still be your operating system, right? For many of us, this is our operating system. And so I step out of this traumatic experience. I'm devastated by my experience in the church. I'm so hurt again by the people of God. I really want nothing to do with God in this season. And I'm focusing on healing. How can I heal my body? How can I do trauma work and EMDR and brain spotting? How can I heal my nervous system, the dysregulation of my nervous system? And do you know what I found in every step of this? Was this beautiful way that God was working. Actually, this beautiful way that God has designed us to work, has designed our bodies to work, actually designed the earth to work. And so I'm compelled by this God I keep discovering, and I'm so frustrated with the one that I had experienced this harm and shame-based, fear-oriented way of being in the world. And you add on that your family of origin wounds, you add on that the stories of culture, right? These are layers of ways that we are conditioned. And so as I start exploring these, I go back to the text and I open up Genesis and I read this creation narrative where before God said that we were broken, God says that we were good. That we were good, that we were so good. It was an invitation to own our belovedness. Then it says God bestows. Okay, so creation is this generative, reciprocative, it works, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? And then human beings, the crown of God's creation, do you know that we breathe with the trees? Have you thought about this? Like what you breathe in is what the trees breathe out, and what you breathe out is what the trees breathe in. Like our bodies are designed for this same sort of generative, reciprocative way of being. Do you know that when I learned how to cry, I learned that our tears, releasing them, is a part of how your body returns to homeostasis. Right, the feelings that we repress, the wounds that come up, the things that we avoid or that come up and get cast onto the moments that we're in. And I just could not stop pursuing this mystery that is holding the world together. This is how my friend Jay refers to God these days. He calls it the loving mystery that holds it all together. And as I began to take just this different lens on the text, I just continued to meet God in a new way, this loving mystery that holds it all together. I was still so compelled by the person of Jesus Christ. I did what I don't recommend many do in deconstruction. I went to seminary. But I needed some place to sort of work out with fear and trembling. What did I actually believe about Jesus? What actually is the gospel, and who is it good news for? The gospel paradigm I had been given fell apart, and so I needed to seek a new one. And I don't know how you think about the gospel if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus these days, but I had to sort of be attentive to God's original intentions for creation that I was exploring in Genesis. I'm discovering this way that God intended for things to be, God's original intention. And how Jesus, life, death, and resurrection, is what ushers in a different sort of resurrection power in this world. And that Jesus unleashed this thing called the kingdom of heaven, right? If you go back and read the Bible just through the lens and text of Jesus, I just found this very compelling, redemptive, and restorative way that Jesus was in the world. And I see this redemption and restoration and how our bodies work. I see this in the broken things that keep you up at night, is an invitation to lean into those things and to embody a different way of being. And part of my journey of rediscovering Christ then was also actually rediscovering myself. And if you grew up in a fear-based, shame-based religion, you probably were not extended that opportunity, right? In fact, if you're like me, I discovered when I was exiled into the wilderness after this sort of shattering and true exile from a church that I had been a part of for about 12 years, I started to discover these parts of me that I had lobbed off for the sake of belonging somewhere else. Right? Anything that's fear or shame-based requires us to sort of cut that part off to survive. And as I started finding these parts of my true self. I was really impressed with how Stan said my name when he introduced me, because everywhere I go, people don't know how to say it. And so one guy was like, oh, I just decided I was going to meet with my pastor. We had a meeting set up, and he said, I told my friends I was going to meet with Pastor Ludacris. I know we're working with a range of ages here. Ludacris is a rapper. And I rapped my speech in the 5th grade to be student body president. So I felt so seen in that moment, okay, that this journey, I started writing poetry again, things I had done when I was little. I started to come home to myself, and then I see these words of Jesus about loving God, loving your neighbor as yourself. And I realized I was never given any sort of tools or invitation to love myself. In fact, as a woman in some of the paradigms I came from, being faithful to Jesus was not loving myself. Putting myself last, going last. There's all sorts of ways that each of us have been given messages, right? About the parts of us that are acceptable, about the parts of us that belong, about the parts of us that are not welcome here, and so we lob them off for the sake of belonging. But what I've learned on this journey is that we can't belong to God or to anyone to any greater depths than we belong to ourselves first. This loneliness epidemic that we're seeing in the world right now, this is because we're so disconnected on the inside. And I actually have the audacity to believe right now that perhaps this is an invitation for a life-giving church, is to help people begin to just come home to themselves. The next sort of part of that creation narrative, you see that God put God's image on us. Each one of us. God put God's image on us. In the ancient Near East, the gods would have idols that represented them. It was a small sort of mini structure, mini representation of the God that you worship. And God bestows that image on each and every one of us, uniquely and distinctly. And I think if we have a vision for redemption and restoration of all things, this work that Christ began, we have to bring that unique, distinct part of us out to connect with that, who we are, the goodness we were created to unleash in this world. I'm actually convinced, based on this, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a counselor, but I'm obsessed with neuroscience. And I believe that part of this, the invitation to follow Jesus, the invitation to be a part of that redemption and restoration, is being attentive to those wounds that are inside of us. Whether this is pain that you inherited, do you know that trauma gets passed down at the cellular level in your physiological body until those feelings are felt and those tears are cried? And if we could be people who are leaning into that divine love from the very beginning, being attentive to those wounds and how they drive us. When I was doing some of this work, I worked with an organization called On Site, and they do some residential stuff, they do some distance stuff, they do intensives, a brilliant organization. And they taught me this line. I'm just going to tell you now, it really pissed me off. But they said, you know, one of our ways of growing in self-understanding is that we're attentive to, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And I don't love the trope of how that word hysterical is used to describe or diminish women. And so I was really angry at this. But then I thought, oh, wait, what if it's hostile? It's historical. Because that's how I tend to experience those wounds in my brothers. But for all of us, if it's bigger than what's happening in the moment, if it's hysterical, if it's hostile, it's historical, and it's guiding and shaping the way that you live and that you receive love and that you show up today. What if we could be people that live from that place of belovedness and that invitation to enter into pain and discomfort? This is the way of Jesus. And might our own expanded capacity for complexity, expanded capacity for discomfort within ourselves actually allow us to break open for what is so broken in the world around us right now. I think so many of us are recognizing those gaps between what we say we believe and how we behave, right? And after I saw that in the systems I was a part of, good God, do you know I had to start excavating my own insides for the ways that I say one thing but do another? This was following the path of pain, and what I'm most convinced of these days, if I had to summarize the gospel for you or the good news that I think is available to each and every one of us, I would simply say that there's healing and resurrection power possible in the way of Jesus. And when that happens on the inside, when we open ourselves up to that discomfort, those wounds become medicine to help heal the world. And those wounds don't leave us. They are either poisoning you or they become medicine to you and to the world. I think this is the invitation to follow Jesus. I was connecting with a friend a little while ago. We were having a conversation about the Nazarite vow. This is something sort of in the Old Testament. If you have ever, spent years trying to read that part of your Bible. Any of you? And it was a vow among the Hebrew people, among the Israelites, where if someone accepted the vow, there were certain rules that they had to live by. I think they didn't cut their hair, so they were all natural. They probably didn't shave. They looked like my friend over here, all the guys walking around here. They didn't drink or eat from the certain bushes. They couldn't interact with dead things. There were some rules, some specifics. But the intention of the Nazarite vow was to actually walk around in proximity and presence with other people, embodying your fullness, embodying the presence of God. And so you imagine perhaps a market, maybe similar to this. My seminary professors might not support that, but imagine this was your community, your collective, and you're walking through and then you run into somebody who is experiencing the Nazarite vow. It's like a whoa, they're kind of disheveled. They just look different. And this is an intentional choice for them to look different by owning their fullness. They're embodying the image of God to the people around them, often in confronting ways. And I was talking to a friend about this, and I was like, do you know, this is actually how I experience my queer siblings in this moment. The permission and the invitation that they have given themselves to remember the parts that they had to dismember in order to belong, to survive in this world. They're giving us permission and invitation to own those parts of ourselves. They are modeling, embodying part of the image of God that I need to see and to grow in. My friend Billy is here and has a whole theology of disgust. They're reminding me of how I have seen the church other people. And do you know who I most want to other right now is those people who taught me that way of being in the world, right? The one thing that is keeping me from abandoning any version of church, I would say, and not losing my mind on those people. Who are those people for you? Can I ask you for just a second? The ones that get you really triggered, right, in the moment, the ones that The Hulk is how I like to describe it in my body. Do you know what that feels like for you? That person that wants to talk about the election or make misogynistic comments or make racial slurs that they don't even realize are inappropriate things. Is that right? Who are the people? Because all of us have these people in our lives. Maybe you just don't like the way that they chew. I feel like that counts in something like this. In those moments, I have an opportunity, if we're driven by shame and fear, shame cuts off empathy. So I think this part is so important. If you're living in a fear-based, shame-oriented paradigm, you actually can't feel empathy for somebody else because you've cut off your connection to yourself. You've had to in order to survive. So when we can begin to come home to ourselves and practice self-compassion, that actually opens up something in you to be able to extend compassion to someone else. So right now, those people in my mind, those people that I went to church with, those people that ignored my claims about sexual harassment in this massive church with significant influence, those people who ignored my concerns about the way that power was being held, those people who threatened me if I told the truth about my experience that worked there. Those people that said if I told my story publicly, they would pursue me. This $200 million organization, if you tell the truth about what happened, we will come after you with a defamation lawsuit. I don't have those kinds of resources. And I had to look my kids in the face and decide, am I going to acquiesce and just keep my mouth shut? It can't hurt me anymore. I don't work there. But if this man retires and is going to coach pastors full time, he's a cutting edge leading leader on empowering women in leadership. He's going to have so much access than any other woman that experiences harm or abuse at his hands because I didn't speak up. I'm complicit in that. And this was my own reconciliation of that. But what I will tell you is when I understand the fear and shame these people were working in, I can begin to see them as really scared humans with what they imagined was a lot on the line to protect, right? And on the heels of trying to see those people as humans, I'm learning to see myself as a human more. I'm learning to enter into the discomfort of our humanity in ways that invite me to reorient the way that I live, that invite me to be attentive to what I say, I believe, and how I actually behave, and are those things aligned, right? I've actually learned to stay in that shame and fear paradigm. You have to have a level of cognitive dissonance just to survive, right? And then if you choose this, I'm telling you, I'm almost trying to talk you out of it, like this painful path of trying to come home to yourself and learning to live connected to other people, connected to the divine, to the wisdom within and the external wisdom of God that's at work around us. Those invitations, those synchronicities. Sometimes I talk about God right now as the algorithm of the universe. When I was really uncomfortable with what did I believe about God and about Jesus and about church, that was just about the most helpful way I could refer to God. I've grown. My friend I shared with you calls God the loving mystery that holds it all together. That's an invitation for me. All the spiritual practices that I had at that time, that before my shattering, devotionals or prayer life, or all those spiritual practices, I had to just burn. They burned in the rubble of what was behind me. And so I found some new spiritual practices, and I just want to extend to you two that have been life-changing in my own journey. The first one is the St. Ignatius practice. Where you just spend time at the end of the day. I would often do it on a walk because I was very sciencey and understood certain hours of the day, when the birds chirp at a certain frequency that actually calms your nervous system. Do you know this is a real thing? I was, studying how can I scientifically heal my body. And so I started these meditations, these reflections on those walks. And it's just this reflection about, God, where were you at work today? And I missed it. Sort of like a, post-game, right? What happened that you missed? How do we celebrate the highlights? Usually for me, it wasn't the highlights. It was all of those Hulk moments that I had to go back and apologize for. I would come away from this time just reflecting differently. Where did my kids want to tell me a story? And I was like, Do you do the uh-huhs with people that you love most? Where were the moments that God was, Where were the moments that God was at work and that I just missed it? Or where are the things I need to go repair with the people that I love? And what I found over time is that this reflective practice at the end of the day started to change how I saw my days. And sometimes I would catch those things in the moment and not have to go back and do repair work because I was just a little bit more present to them. And these things began to just calibrate my attentiveness to myself, which if you're not a person who's very aware of how you live in the soft animal of your body is very uncomfortable to begin to live in your body, right? To let go of the things that numb, even healthy and good things that numb. But I began to sort of come home to myself, to live connected to my body, connected to other people. This attentiveness, this practice has changed my life. And my encounters with the living God have just exponentially increased. I just want to offer to you this prayer of St. Ignatius, or this attentiveness. And the other one is called savoring. My good friend who was just sitting over here, Brian, brings his kids over once a week. I'm a single mom. I have 2 kids. He's got a couple kids. And we do right now what we call toast night. And so everybody can make toast for dinner. You can make avocado toast. You can make Nutella toast. You can make cinnamon toast. You can make cheese toast. Well, it's so simple. And then we sit around and what are the things that we're going to toast to from this last week? And would we maybe say a toast or 2 for the week ahead? And we invite our kids into this, and it's hilarious and it's ridiculous. And my kids usually fight me on it. The toast helps. That's my tip. But we just spend time savoring those things that we would miss. And this has rewired our bodies in this way of noticing and choosing, consenting to being present to what's around me. Accepting the realities around me, even the hard ones, recognizing that when I can accept reality, that's the first step to liberation, right? When we can be clear about where we are so that we can together discern the path of liberation. So we can ask, what are these things within me that have been called to be set free in this world? That is the invitation. How are we going to partner with Christ in the redemption and restoration of all things? Pursuing mutuality, recognizing, like Fannie Lou Hamer says, my freedom does not come without your freedom. My freedom is bound up in your freedom. We get free together. So when we can be people that want to live in alignment with our values, right? We want to embody the things that we espouse. It starts to change the way that we live and the way that we show up in this world as we become people who are getting free on the inside, and we get to be a part of reorienting our own lives and the systems and structures around us, participating in them in an upside down, kingdom-minded, healing and redemptive way. We have a part to play in this. The church has the opportunity to perhaps be the most redemptive presence on the face of the planet, particularly in this moment. If we were people that were getting free with the mission of setting others free. I'd like to end with a poem from the same poet that we heard from earlier. I was so impressed, Brian. Hafiz says, the small woman builds cages for everyone she knows, while the sage, who has to duck her head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful, rowdy prisoners.
Sometimes I feel like the shame's been so deep. Sometimes I feel like the shame's been so deep. Sometimes I feel like the shame's been so deep. And how can I find home? Home, home. they've stomped on my heart. Sometimes I feel like they've stomped on my heart. Sometimes I feel like they've stomped on my heart. How will I find home? Home, home. How will I find home? Oh, sometimes I feel like I'm broken on the ground. Sometimes I feel like I'm broken on the ground. Sometimes I feel like I'm broken on the ground. How can I find home? Home, home. How can I find home? Home. Sometimes I feel like you took me by the hand. Sometimes I feel like you took me by the hand. Sometimes I feel like you took me by the hand. Help me to come home, home, home. Help me to come home, home. You looked inside my closet and you found that old dress. It's dressed, stained with semen, but I could not throw it out. You looked inside my closet and you found those old clothes from long ago, and you helped me light them all on fire. You helped me throw them, help me throw them, help me throw them away, throw them away. You looked inside my closet and you found that mirror from long ago, that mirror that showed an image of me as a tiny shameful thing. Why, you looked inside my closet and you found all the hurt and the pain, and you took it away like that old dress and all that old shame. Now times I feel like I can take somebody by the hand. Now times I feel like I can take somebody by the hand. Now times I feel like I can take somebody by the hand and help them find a home. Home, home. Help them find a home. Home.
Ken, you have a gift. Thank you for letting us experience how you see the world. And I just want you to know there were things in this room, this tent, that you didn't get to see that were very moving about people experiencing that invitation to help others find their way home. Mm-hmm. Thank you for letting us see as you see. Thank you so much for joining this morning. as we woke the goose together. I'm a little bit more excited about what I believe. I'm going to stick around for a little bit if anybody wants to talk geeky stuff like physics or nervous system work, neuroscience, psychology. I'm your girl. And I'll be walking around for a little while too, so I would love to catch up and get to know you. Have a great rest of your day.
Amen.